The night I hit that black SUV, I thought I had ruined my life. I never imagined I had just driven straight into the world of the man who would change it forever. The rain came down harder than I had ever seen, turning the streets of Manhattan into a blur of silver reflections and endless shadows. My windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the storm, moving back and forth like they were trying to erase a nightmare that was already happening. My hands were tied around the steering wheel of my old Honda Civic, my knuckles pale, my heart racing faster than the engine could handle. I kept checking the rearview mirror. Again. And again. Because sometimes, you don't need proof to know you're being followed. You just know. 3 hours earlier, I had been sitting at my desk at the small architecture firm where I worked, staring at drawings of buildings I would probably never design myself. I was 26 years old, buried under student loans, working overtime, and still trying to believe that hard work would eventually lead somewhere. My life was simple. Quiet. Predictable. At least, that was what I thought. Then my phone lit up with another message. I didn't need to read the name. I already knew who it was. My stomach tightened. Some people leave memories behind. Others leave warnings. I had spent the last year learning the difference. I turned onto a darker street, hoping to find a shortcut home. The rain blurred the traffic lights, the buildings, the world itself. Everything looked unfamiliar, like the city I knew had disappeared beneath the storm. My only thought was getting home. Getting somewhere safe. Somewhere I could breathe. Then I saw it. A black SUV waiting at the intersection. It wasn't just another car. It looked different. Bigger. More expensive. Like it belonged to someone who never had to worry about repair bills or late payments or choosing between groceries and electricity. The vehicle sat beneath the streetlights like it owned the road. The light ahead changed. Yellow. Then red. I should have stopped. Anyone with common sense would have stopped. But fear has a way of making ordinary decisions feel impossible. My foot pressed down. The Civic moved forward. For 1 second, everything became strangely quiet. I saw the rain falling across the windshield. I saw the reflection of the city lights on the wet pavement. I saw the black SUV beginning to move. And then the world changed. The sound was unforgettable. Metal against metal. A sudden impact. A moment where time seemed to slow down. My seat belt locked across my chest as my car came to a stop. The airbag filled the space in front of me, and the smell of smoke and rain filled my senses. Then silence. The kind of silence that feels louder than any noise. I sat there for a few seconds, trying to understand what had happened. My first thought wasn't about the stranger in the SUV. It wasn't even about my damaged car. It was simple. I had made a mistake. A huge one. My old Honda was already barely holding together. There was no way I could afford repairs for another vehicle. Especially not one that looked like it cost more than my entire apartment building. I stepped out into the rain, my shoes immediately soaking through. The cold water ran down my hair and jacket as I looked at the damage. My car looked exhausted, just like me. The SUV, however, looked almost untouched. That was when the doors opened. Slowly. Calmly. 3 men stepped out wearing dark suits. They didn't look like regular drivers checking an accident. They moved with confidence. With purpose. Like the world usually made room for them. I froze. Then the back door opened. And he stepped out. The first thing I noticed was his silence. Not anger. Not panic. Silence. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, standing in the middle of the storm as if the rain itself knew better than to touch him. His dark hair was slightly wet, but his expression remained unreadable. His eyes found mine, and something about that moment made me forget the cold. Forget the rain. Forget everything. I didn't know his name. I didn't know his story. I only knew one thing. The entire city seemed to move around him, but he stood completely still. Like he was the center of everything. He looked at my damaged car. Then at me. And when he finally spoke, his voice was calm enough to make my fear grow stronger. "Do you have any idea whose car you just hit?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Because at that moment, I still believed I had only caused an expensive accident. I had no idea I had just crossed paths with the most powerful man in the city. And I definitely didn't know that this one mistake would change both of our lives forever. The rain kept falling, but I barely noticed it anymore. My entire focus was on the man standing in front of me. There was something about him that made the noisy city disappear. The passing cars. The distant horns. The storm above us. Everything faded into the background. "I am sorry," I finally managed to say. My voice sounded smaller than I wanted. "I did not mean to hit your car." His eyes stayed on me for a moment longer than necessary. Not angry. Not confused. Just studying me. Like he was trying to understand something I did not even understand about myself. "You were not looking at the road," he said. His voice was calm, almost too calm. I swallowed and looked down at my damaged Honda. "I know. I made a mistake." I expected frustration. I expected shouting. I expected someone who owned a vehicle like that to make me feel even smaller than I already felt. Instead, he simply looked back at the street. One of the men beside him spoke quietly. "Mr. Romano, we should leave this area." Mr. Romano. The name meant nothing to me at that moment. I did not know the reputation attached to it. I did not know how many people in this city lowered their voices when they heard it. To me, he was just the stranger whose expensive SUV I had damaged on a terrible night. "Can we exchange insurance information?" I asked, reaching for my purse with shaking hands. "I have coverage. It is not enough for a car like yours, but I will find a way." The words came out quickly because I needed him to know I was not running away. I had spent my entire life taking responsibility for my choices. Even when things were unfair. Even when it was difficult. His expression changed slightly. Almost like he was surprised. "You think this is about money?" he asked. I hesitated. "Is it not?" For the first time, something almost like curiosity appeared in his eyes. He looked at me standing there in the rain, wearing a jacket that had clearly seen better days, next to a car that had carried me through years of impossible situations. "What were you running from?" The question caught me completely off guard. My fingers tightened around my purse strap. I was not running. It was a lie. A small one. But he noticed. Somehow, he noticed. The man who seemed to know everything about the world around him had noticed the one thing I was trying hardest to hide. He did not push. He simply looked at me and said, "You are afraid." I looked away. Because he was right. I hated that he was right. A few minutes later, a woman from a nearby building approached with an umbrella and asked if everyone was okay. The simple kindness almost broke me. I realized how exhausted I was. How long I had been pretending I could handle everything alone. Mr. Romano watched silently as I thanked her. Then he turned to one of his men. "Arrange the repairs." I looked back at him immediately. "No. I cannot accept that." His eyes returned to mine. "You can. I do not even know you." A quiet pause followed. Then he answered, "That is exactly why you should be careful." I did not understand what he meant. Not yet. But as I watched him step back into the black SUV, I felt something I could not explain. This was not the end of a bad night. It was the beginning of something I never saw coming. The next morning, I woke up believing the storm had ended. I was wrong. Some storms do not disappear when the rain stops. They follow you quietly into the daylight. My apartment was silent except for the sound of my old coffee maker struggling on the kitchen counter. I stood there holding a warm mug, staring at the city outside my window, trying to convince myself that the accident had been nothing more than a terrible night. A mistake. A problem I could solve. Then my phone rang. I almost did not answer. Unknown numbers had become something I avoided. But something inside me told me to pick up. "Miss Carter?" a calm voice asked. I froze. "Yes?" "This is from Romano Enterprises. Your vehicle has been taken to a repair center. The arrangements have already been made." I looked at my damaged Honda sitting below my apartment window. I told him I could handle it myself. There was a short pause. "Mr. Romano expected you would say that." Hearing his name made me remember the way he stood in the rain. The way everyone around him listened without question. "I cannot accept this," I said. "I barely know him." The person on the phone answered politely. "Mr. Romano does not usually explain his decisions." Then the call ended. I spent the next hour trying to understand why a stranger would help someone like me. People with power usually did not notice people like me. I was not wealthy. I was not connected. I was just Emily Carter. A woman who worked too many hours, drove an old car, and kept telling herself that everything would eventually get better. But somehow, I had caught the attention of a man whose name seemed to open every door in the city. By the afternoon, my car was gone from the parking lot. In its place was a note from the repair company confirming the work. No demands. No conditions. Just help. That should have made me feel relieved. Instead, it made me uneasy. Because kindness from a stranger can sometimes feel more complicated than anger from one. Later that evening, I received another unexpected visit. Not from Mr. Romano. From one of his assistants. He stood outside my apartment building holding an envelope. "This is for you." I did not take it immediately. "What is it?" "Information about the accident." My expression changed. "Why would I need that?" He looked toward the street before answering. "Because Mr. Romano believes you deserve to know the truth." Inside the envelope was a copy of the accident report, along with details I had not seen the night before. My eyes moved across the page slowly. Something about the situation had not been as simple as I thought. There were missing pieces. Small details that did not make sense. I looked out at the city lights, feeling the same strange pull I had felt when I first met him. A feeling that told me my life had crossed into a world I did not understand. The man in the black SUV was no longer just a stranger. He was a question I could not stop thinking about. And somehow, I already knew I was going to find the answer. The envelope stayed on my kitchen table for almost an hour before I finally opened it. I kept telling myself I was only curious. That I was looking for answers. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wanted to understand the man behind the name. Adrian Romano. The name that seemed to carry a weight I could feel even without knowing the story behind it. The accident report looked ordinary at first. A simple collision on a rainy Manhattan street. My mistake. His damaged vehicle. Nothing unusual. But then I noticed the details at the bottom of the page. A second vehicle had been recorded nearby. A witness statement had been added. And the timing of everything felt strange. Someone had been watching that intersection before I arrived. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a cold feeling settle in my chest. Not fear exactly. Something closer to confusion. Why would Adrian Romano care enough to investigate an accident between strangers? The next day, I returned to my office, hoping routine would make everything feel normal again. The familiar sounds of keyboards, coffee machines, and conversations about deadlines should have brought me comfort. Instead, I felt like I was carrying a secret nobody else knew existed. My coworker Sarah noticed immediately. "You look like you have not slept," she said. I smiled slightly. I had a complicated night. I almost told her everything. The storm. The accident. The mysterious man who paid for my repairs without asking for anything in return. But something stopped me. Maybe because I did not understand it myself. That afternoon, my assistant told me someone was waiting downstairs. My first thought was that it was another message from Adrian Romano. I was wrong. It was Adrian himself. He stood in the lobby of my office building wearing a dark suit, completely calm among the rushing employees around him. Everyone seemed to notice him, even if they did not know who he was. Some people simply carried a presence that changed the atmosphere around them. "Miss Carter," he said when I approached. I stopped a few feet away. "You could have called. You would have avoided the call." I almost denied it, but I knew he was right. He looked at me for a moment, then handed me a small folder. "There are things you should know about that night." I held the folder but did not open it. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "You do not know me." His expression softened slightly. "That is exactly why." I did not understand. He looked toward the busy street outside the glass doors. "Most people make decisions based on what they want from others. You made a mistake, but your first instinct was to take responsibility." His words surprised me. Nobody had ever described me that way. I had always thought I was just trying to survive. "You are not like the people I usually meet," he continued quietly. I looked at him carefully. "And what kind of people do you usually meet?" For the first time, silence filled the space between us. His eyes moved away, as if the answer belonged to a part of his life he rarely showed anyone. Then he said, "People who forget that every choice has a consequence." Before I could respond, he walked away. I watched him disappear through the glass doors, carrying the same mystery he had arrived with. But now I knew one thing. Adrian Romano was not helping me because he felt sorry for me. He was trying to understand me. And somehow, that was even more dangerous than I expected. The folder Adrian Romano left behind stayed closed on my desk for 3 days. I told myself I was respecting his privacy. That I was not interested in secrets that did not belong to me. But every time I walked past it, I felt the same question returning. Why would a man like him care about someone like me? On the 4th morning, curiosity won. I opened it. Inside were details about the accident, but not the kind I expected. There were notes about the location, the weather conditions, and the unusual timing of events. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that explained everything. But there was one thing that caught my attention. A handwritten note at the bottom of the page. "Some mistakes happen for a reason." I stared at those words longer than I should have. They sounded like something Adrian would say. Calm. Certain. Like he believed the world followed a pattern most people could not see. I closed the folder and tried to return to my normal life. But normal felt different now. I noticed things I had ignored before. The way people changed their behavior when Adrian Romano's name came up. The way conversations suddenly became quieter. The way everyone seemed to know something about him except me. That evening, I stopped at a small coffee shop near my apartment. It was one of those places where the chairs did not match, the music was always too soft, and everyone seemed to be writing the next chapter of their life. I sat near the window with my laptop open, pretending to work. Then I saw him. Adrian was standing outside. Not surrounded by people. Not inside a luxury office. Just standing there beneath the city lights, looking like a man carrying the weight of a world nobody else could see. For a moment, I wondered if he had followed me. Then I immediately felt guilty for thinking it. He noticed me through the glass and walked inside. "You always choose places where nobody expects you to be," he said. I looked up. "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" A small smile appeared on his face. The first real one I had seen. "I am not sure yet." I closed my laptop. "You have a strange way of talking to people. Most people tell me what they think I want to hear." He paused. "You do not." I looked down at my coffee cup. "Maybe because I do not know what you want." "That is rare." His answer was quiet. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The city moved around us. Cars passed. People left. Life continued. But somehow, that small table felt separate from everything else. "Why did you really help me?" I asked. Adrian looked at me carefully. "Because when you thought you had made the biggest mistake of your life, your first concern was making things right." I did not know how to respond. I had never considered that moment important. To me, it was just what anyone should do. But to him, it meant something. "You see the world differently," he said. And I wanted to understand why. Those words stayed with me long after he left. Because for the first time, I wondered if maybe the accident had not only changed my life. Maybe it had revealed something that had been waiting to happen all along. The days after that conversation felt strangely different. Nothing around me had changed. The same streets. The same crowded subway stations. The same stack of unfinished drawings waiting on my desk. But somehow, I felt like I was standing between two worlds. The life I knew, and the one Adrian Romano had quietly opened the door to. I tried to convince myself that he was just a businessman. A powerful one, maybe. A mysterious one, definitely. But still just a person. Yet every time I heard his name, I remembered the way people reacted. The respect. The caution. The silence. It made me wonder what kind of life created someone like him. A week after our meeting at the coffee shop, I received an invitation to visit the Romano Foundation. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I was not someone who attended meetings with influential people. My world was design plans, deadlines, and finding affordable places to eat after work. But the message was clear. Adrian wanted my opinion on a community project involving housing designs for families who needed better opportunities. I almost declined. Then I remembered something he had said. He wanted to understand why I saw the world differently. Maybe this was my chance to understand his world too. The foundation building was unlike any place I had ever entered. Glass walls. Marble floors. People moving with confidence. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they belonged. I felt like the only person who had taken a wrong turn. Then Adrian appeared. No dramatic entrance. No crowd around him. Just him walking toward me with the same calm expression I had seen in the rain. "You came," he said. I smiled slightly. "You sound surprised." "Most people say no when they do not understand something." "And you think I understand this?" I asked, looking around. "No," he replied. "That is why I asked you." That answer stayed with me. Because most people wanted opinions that matched their own. Adrian seemed interested in the ones that challenged him. During the meeting, I noticed something unexpected. He listened. Really listened. He asked questions. He considered ideas from people who worked far below his position. It did not match the image I had created in my mind. I had expected someone cold and distant. Instead, I saw someone who carried responsibility like a heavy coat he could never remove. After the meeting ended, I found him standing alone near the window, looking down at the city. "You seem different here," I said. He turned slightly. "Different from what?" "From the man who stepped out of that black SUV." For a moment, he said nothing. Then he answered quietly. "That man is the one everyone expects me to be." His words surprised me. "And who are you when nobody is watching?" Adrian looked away from the window. "I am still trying to figure that out." It was the first time I saw something beyond his confidence. Not weakness. Something more human. A question. A person searching for an answer. And somehow, that made him feel less distant. When I left the building that evening, I realized something had changed. I was no longer just curious about Adrian Romano. I was beginning to see the person hidden behind the reputation. And I knew that discovering the truth about him might change everything I believed about the man who entered my life on a rainy night. The strangest thing about getting to know Adrian Romano was realizing how much I had misunderstood him. I had spent years believing people with power lived in a completely different universe. A world where problems disappeared with a phone call and doors opened without effort. But the more time I spent around Adrian, the more I noticed the opposite. His world was not easier. It was heavier. Every decision seemed to carry a responsibility I could barely imagine. A few days after my visit to the foundation, Adrian asked me to join him for a review of the housing project designs. I almost laughed when I saw the message. Me? Giving opinions to a man who had entire teams of professionals working for him? It felt impossible. But I went. The meeting room was filled with architects, planners, and executives who spoke confidently about numbers and timelines. I listened quietly at first, taking notes and studying the designs. The buildings looked impressive. Modern. Expensive. But something bothered me. Finally, I spoke. "These designs are beautiful," I said. Everyone looked at me. "But they do not feel like homes." The room became quiet. I could feel people waiting for Adrian's reaction. I expected him to defend the plan. Instead, he leaned back and asked, "Why?" I pointed at the drawings. "Because they were created by people who know how to build buildings, not necessarily by people who know how families live inside them." I explained that a home was not just square footage or expensive materials. It was the morning light through a kitchen window. A place where children could do homework. A corner where someone could sit after a long day and feel safe. Nobody spoke for a few seconds. Then Adrian looked at the design team. "Change it." That simple sentence surprised everyone. There was no argument. No need to prove he was right. He just listened. After the meeting, we walked through the hallway together. "You are not afraid to disagree with me," he said. I looked at him. "Should I be?" A small smile appeared. "Most people are." I stopped walking for a moment. "That sounds exhausting." He looked at me, almost surprised by my answer. "What does?" "Having everyone around you afraid to tell you the truth." For the first time, Adrian had no immediate response. The silence between us felt different. Not uncomfortable. Honest. Later that evening, we sat in a quiet restaurant away from the busy streets of Manhattan. It was not a formal business meeting. No documents. No assistants. Just two people talking. I learned small things about him. He preferred simple coffee over expensive drinks. He hated crowded events. He remembered details about people even when they forgot meeting him. And he learned things about me too. He learned that I kept every handwritten note people gave me. That I still called my mother every Sunday even though she lived across the country. That I believed people could change if someone gave them a reason to try. "You really believe that?" he asked. I looked at him. "Yes. Even people who have made mistakes?" I thought about the question carefully. "Especially them." Adrian became quiet. I did not know why those words affected him. But I saw something in his expression shift. Like I had touched a part of him that he kept hidden from everyone else. That night, when I walked home, I realized something I never expected. I was not just learning about Adrian Romano's world. Somehow, he was slowly becoming part of mine. And that scared me more than I wanted to admit. The first time I realized Adrian Romano was changing me was not during some grand moment. It was something much smaller. Something I almost missed. I was standing in my kitchen on a Sunday morning, holding a cup of coffee, and I caught myself wondering what kind of morning he was having. The thought surprised me. A few weeks earlier, he had been a stranger who stepped out of a black SUV after I made a mistake. Now, somehow, he had become someone I thought about when my apartment was quiet. That scared me. Not because of him. Because of how easily a person could become important without asking for permission. My life had always been built around control. Work hard. Pay bills. solve problems, keep moving. Feelings were something I did not have time for. But Adrian had a way of slowing everything down. He noticed things most people ignored. The tired expression behind a smile. The hesitation before someone spoke. The small details that revealed more than words ever could. A few days later, I visited the foundation again. This time, it felt different. I was no longer the outsider walking through unfamiliar doors. People greeted me. They asked for my thoughts. They listened. And somehow, I knew Adrian was the reason. After the meeting, I found him standing near the same window where we had talked before. The city stretched below us, full of noise and movement. "You changed the project," I said. He looked at me. "We changed the project." I smiled. "You know what I mean." He looked away for a moment. "You reminded me of something I forgot." "What?" "That numbers represent people." The answer was simple, but the way he said it made me realize those words meant more than a business decision. They meant something personal. "Who taught you to forget that?" I asked. The question came out before I could stop it. For a second, I thought I had crossed a line. But Adrian did not become distant. He just became quiet. "Life," he finally said. "And maybe I allowed it." I looked at him carefully. This was the first time he admitted he was not always certain. The man everyone saw as powerful and impossible to challenge was still someone carrying memories he did not talk about. "You know," I said softly, "being strong does not mean you never change." He looked at me with an expression I could not read. "You always say things like that." "Like what?" "Things that make people question themselves." I laughed quietly. Maybe people should question themselves more. For a moment, the serious man everyone feared disappeared. I saw someone who was simply listening. Someone who was trying. Later that evening, Adrian invited me to a small charity event hosted by the foundation. I almost refused. Crowds were never my favorite, especially rooms filled with people who knew exactly how to judge someone in seconds. But Adrian said one sentence that changed my mind. "You do not have to become part of my world. I just want you to see it clearly." So I went. Walking into that room, surrounded by wealth and influence, I realized something important. I was not there because I belonged beside Adrian Romano. I was there because, for the first time in a long time, he was letting someone see who he truly was. And I wondered if the biggest mystery was not discovering his past. Maybe it was discovering why a man who had everything had chosen to trust someone who had nothing to offer except honesty. The charity event was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The moment I stepped inside the grand hall, I felt like I had entered a world built for people who were born knowing where they belonged. The ceilings were higher than my entire apartment building. The lights reflected against polished floors. Conversations moved around me like waves, filled with names, businesses, and connections I did not understand. I adjusted my dress and reminded myself why I was there. I was not there to impress anyone. I was there because Adrian asked me to see his world. And for some reason, I trusted him enough to say yes. Adrian found me within minutes. He always seemed to know where I was, even in a crowded room. But tonight was different. He was not surrounded by assistants or people waiting for his approval. He looked almost relaxed. "You came," he said. I smiled. "You already knew I would." A small expression crossed his face. "Maybe I hoped." That simple answer caught me off guard. Adrian Romano, the man who seemed impossible to surprise, had just admitted he was hoping for something. We walked through the event together, and I noticed something I had never seen before. People did not just respect him. They watched him. They studied his reactions. They wanted to know what he thought before making their own decisions. It made me understand something. Being powerful did not always mean being free. Sometimes it meant carrying the expectations of everyone around you. Later, We stood near a quiet balcony overlooking the city. The sounds from the event faded behind us. The lights of Manhattan stretched endlessly in front of my eyes. "Do you ever get tired of this?" I asked. Adrian looked at the city. "Of what?" "Being the person everyone expects you to be." For a moment, he did not answer. Then he said, "Every day." I looked at him, surprised by his honesty. "Then why keep doing it?" He smiled faintly, but there was sadness behind it. "Because some responsibilities do not disappear just because they become difficult." I understood that answer more than I expected. We both knew what it meant to keep moving even when nobody saw the effort behind it. "You know," I said, "you do not always have to be the strongest person in the room." Adrian turned toward me. "You really believe that?" "Yes." "Why?" I thought about it carefully. Because people who never allow themselves to be human eventually forget what they are protecting. The silence that followed felt different. Not empty. Full. Adrian looked away, but I saw the reaction in his eyes. My words had reached somewhere deeper than I intended. Before we left, a woman approached Adrian and greeted him warmly. She introduced herself as someone who had known his family for many years. I noticed the change in Adrian immediately. His expression became more careful. More distant. Like a door had quietly closed. The woman mentioned his past, something about promises and old expectations. Adrian changed the subject before she could continue. On the ride home, I could not stop thinking about it. Everyone knew the powerful man Adrian Romano. But almost nobody seemed to know the person underneath. And I realized I wanted to know that person. Not because of his influence. Not because of his name. But because somewhere behind all that confidence was someone who was still searching for a reason to believe he could be different. The days after the charity event felt different. Not because something dramatic had happened. There was no sudden change in my life, no moment where everything became clear. It was something quieter. A feeling that stayed with me when the city became silent at night. I kept thinking about Adrian standing on that balcony, looking at Manhattan like it was both his greatest achievement and his heaviest responsibility. Before meeting him, I thought power meant freedom. I thought people with influence could simply choose whatever life they wanted. But Adrian had shown me another side. Sometimes having everything meant having no room to be yourself. A few mornings later, I received a call from the foundation. They wanted me to review the next stage of the housing project. I smiled when I heard the request. A few months ago, I was just trying to survive my own deadlines. Now, people were asking for my opinion on projects that could change lives. It felt impossible. But I knew exactly who had made that happen. Adrian. When I arrived at the foundation, I expected another busy meeting. Instead, I found Adrian sitting alone in his office, looking through documents. The room was quiet. Almost peaceful. "You are early," he said without looking up. I smiled. "You say that like it is surprising. Most people arrive when they are expected. And I suppose you think I do not follow rules?" He finally looked at me. "I think you question them." I laughed softly. "That is not always a good thing." "Maybe it should be." His answer was immediate. It made me pause. There was something different about him that day. He seemed less like the powerful businessman everyone knew and more like the person I had seen when nobody else was around. The person who wondered if he had become someone he never wanted to be. During the project review, I noticed a problem. The plan was efficient, but it ignored one important detail. The people who would live there. "We need to ask them what they need," I said. One of the executives looked surprised. The design team already completed the research. I looked at the reports. Numbers can tell you what people have. They cannot always tell you what people feel. The room became quiet. I looked toward Adrian, expecting him to make the final decision. Instead, he simply nodded. "She is right." After everyone left, I stayed behind to organize my notes. Adrian stood near the window again. It had become a habit of his. Watching the city. Thinking. You trust me too easily, I said. He turned around. Do I? You let me challenge decisions that affect your company. He walked closer, but stopped at a respectful distance. Because you are honest. I looked away. Honesty is not always comfortable. That is why it matters. Those words stayed with me. Because I realized Adrian was not searching for someone who admired him. He had enough people who did that. He was searching for someone who saw him clearly. Later that evening, as I walked home through the busy streets of New York, I thought about the strange path that brought us together. A rainy night. A simple mistake. Two completely different lives crossing for a moment. But now, I understood something. Some meetings do not happen because two people are looking for each other. Sometimes, they happen because both people need someone who can remind them who they are before they forget. The first thing I noticed was that Adrian Romano had started laughing more. Not often. Not loudly. Just small moments that appeared when he forgot the world was watching him. A quiet smile during a conversation. A brief expression of surprise when someone challenged his opinion. Little pieces of a person I had never expected to see. And somehow, those moments mattered more than the expensive rooms, the powerful name, or the reputation that followed him everywhere. I began to understand that people were not always defined by what others believed about them. Sometimes, they were defined by the parts of themselves they kept hidden. A few days after our last meeting, Adrian invited me to visit one of the neighborhoods connected to the foundation project. I expected another formal tour with presentations and carefully prepared speeches. Instead, he arrived wearing a simple dark jacket, without the usual group of people around him. You came alone, I said. He looked at me with a slight smile. You sound disappointed. I am just surprised. Why? Because everyone seems to follow you everywhere. He looked around the street quietly. Sometimes it is easier to be alone. That answer stayed with me. We walked through the neighborhood, speaking with families, business owners, and community members. I watched Adrian carefully. He did not stand above them. He listened. He asked questions. He remembered names. The same man people described as unreachable was now sitting at a small table in a local bakery, asking an elderly owner about the history of the neighborhood. It was strange. The world saw him as someone who controlled everything. But I was starting to see someone who cared deeply about the things he could not control. Later, we stopped outside an unfinished building that would become part of the new housing project. The afternoon sunlight reflected against the windows, making the entire structure glow. You really believe this can change things? I asked. Adrian looked at the building for a long moment. I believe small changes matter. That sounds different from what I expected you to say. He looked at me. What did you expect? I smiled. Something more powerful. Something like you could fix everything. A quiet laugh escaped him. I learned a long time ago that nobody fixes everything. His honesty surprised me. Then why try? He looked back at the building. Because not trying is worse. For a moment, I saw the person behind the confidence. Someone who had learned that perfection was impossible but responsibility was still necessary. On the way back, we stopped at a small park nearby. Children were playing. People were talking. It was an ordinary afternoon. Nothing impressive. Nothing that would appear in a newspaper. But Adrian stood there quietly, watching. You look happy, I said. He seemed surprised by the observation. Do I? Yes. He looked down for a moment. I do not remember the last time someone noticed that. Those words touched me more than I expected. Because I realized something important. Adrian Romano spent his life surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Influence. Approval. Opportunities. But maybe what he needed most was something much simpler. Someone who saw him without asking for anything in return. As we returned to the city, I looked out the window and thought about how impossible our meeting had seemed. Two people from completely different worlds. A mistake that should have ended with paperwork and a repair bill. Instead, it had become a connection neither of us expected. And I knew something was changing. Not just in my life. In his too. The strange thing about change is that you rarely notice it while it is happening. There is no single moment where everything becomes different. No clear sign telling you that your life has moved in another direction. Sometimes, it happens quietly. In conversations. In small decisions. In the way you start seeing someone differently. That was what happened with Adrian Romano. I had stopped seeing him as the powerful man everyone talked about. I had stopped seeing only the expensive suits, the quiet confidence, and the reputation that followed him everywhere. I was starting to see Adrian. Just Adrian. The man who stood by a window when he had too much to think about. The man who listened more than he spoke. The man who seemed surprised every time someone noticed the person behind the image. But I also knew there was still a part of him I did not understand. A part connected to the past he avoided talking about. I noticed it whenever certain names came up. Whenever conversations moved toward his family. Whenever someone mentioned expectations. He became distant for just a second. Almost invisible behind the person everyone knew. One evening, after another long day at the foundation, Adrian asked if I wanted to walk through the city before going home. It was such a normal thing to ask that it almost felt unusual coming from him. No meeting. No business discussion. No reason except wanting to spend time talking. We walked through the streets of Manhattan as the sun disappeared between the buildings. People passed us without recognizing the man beside me. For once, Adrian was not a name. He was just someone walking beside me. Do you ever miss a simpler life? I asked. He looked at me. What makes you think I had one? I smiled slightly. Everyone had something before they became who they are. He looked ahead. The city lights reflected in his eyes. I used to believe becoming successful meant leaving certain things behind. And now? I asked. He was quiet for a moment. Now I wonder if I left behind the wrong things. His answer stayed with me. Because it revealed something I had not expected. Adrian was not proud of every part of his journey. He was someone trying to understand the cost of becoming the person everyone expected him to be. We stopped at a small park near the river. The city sounded different there. Softer. Less demanding. You know what I think? I said. Adrian looked at me. What? I think people spend too much time trying to become someone others will respect. They forget to become someone they can respect themselves. He watched me silently. Then he smiled. You always make difficult things sound simple. Maybe they are simple. Maybe people just make them complicated. For a moment, neither of us spoke. And somehow, that silence felt comfortable. Not empty. Not awkward. Just two people sharing a moment without needing to explain it. When I finally went home that night, I realized something that surprised me. I was no longer wondering why Adrian Romano had entered my life. I was wondering what would happen if he left it. That thought stayed with me longer than I wanted to admit. Because somewhere between a rainy accident and countless unexpected conversations, the stranger I never meant to meet had become someone I could not imagine forgetting. And I knew the hardest part was not learning about his past. The hardest part would be discovering whether the person I saw in front of me was strong enough to choose his future. The morning after that walk through the city, I woke up earlier than usual. For a few seconds, everything felt normal. The sound of traffic outside my window. The smell of coffee filling my small kitchen. The familiar routine of preparing for another busy day. Then I remembered Adrian. And I remembered the question that had stayed with me all night. What would happen if he left my life? I did not have an answer. Maybe because I was afraid to find out. I had spent so much time protecting myself from disappointment that I forgot what it felt like to let someone matter. Adrian had not entered my life with promises or perfect words. He had simply been there. Listening. Understanding. Seeing parts of me that I usually kept hidden. And somehow, without realizing it, I had started doing the same for him. That afternoon, I received a message from him asking if we could meet. The timing felt different. There was no mention of the foundation. No business discussion. Just a simple request to talk. When I arrived at the quiet cafe where we first had a real conversation, Adrian was already there. He looked thoughtful, almost uncertain. It was strange seeing that expression on someone who always seemed so composed. "Something happened," I said. He looked at me and gave a small smile. "You always notice." I sat down across from him. "You make it easy." For a moment, he looked down at his coffee. Then he said, "There are things about my life you do not know." I expected that. Everyone had secrets. Especially someone like Adrian. But the way he said it made me understand this was not about hiding something. It was about deciding whether he could trust someone with the truth. "You do not have to tell me anything you are not ready to share," I said. His eyes lifted toward mine. "That is exactly why I want to." The words surprised me. Adrian Romano, a man surrounded by people who wanted answers, had chosen to speak because I did not demand them. He told me that his life had always been shaped by expectations. Family traditions. Responsibilities. A name that carried more weight than he wanted. "People see the results," he said quietly. "They rarely see the choices that created them." I listened without interrupting. Because I knew some stories were not meant to be rushed. "Have you ever wished you could start over?" I asked. Adrian looked out the window. The city moved around us, completely unaware of the conversation happening inside that small cafe. "More times than I can count." His honesty touched me. "Then why do not you?" He smiled sadly. "Because starting over is easier when nobody depends on you." I thought about that. About how many people carried invisible responsibilities every day. How many people looked strong because they had no other choice. "Maybe you do not need to become someone new," I said. "Maybe you just need to stop hiding the person you already are." Adrian looked at me for a long moment. This time, he did not look like a powerful businessman or someone carrying a heavy reputation. He looked like a man hearing something he had needed to hear for a long time. When we left the cafe, the sky above Manhattan was turning orange. We walked in silence for a while. But it was not the same silence as before. It felt like trust. Like understanding. And as I watched Adrian beside me, I realized something that changed everything. I was no longer afraid of the world he came from. I was more afraid of how much I wanted to be part of the future he was trying to create.